I was 24 when I moved into my first apartment, a small one-bedroom place on the edge of the city. It wasn't much, but the rent was cheap, and it came fully furnished, which meant I didn't have to worry about buying furniture I couldn't afford. The landlord said the previous tenant had left suddenly, but everything inside was in good condition. I didn't ask why she left. I just wanted a place to call my own. For the first few nights, everything felt fine, except the silence. You know that heavy silence when you move somewhere new? The kind that makes you feel like you're being watched even when you know you're alone. It started small, the faint sound of breathing at night. Not the creaks or hums of an old building, but slow, uneven breathing, as if someone was lying in the dark, trying to match their breaths with mine. I told myself it was my imagination. Maybe the neighbors, maybe the pipes. But every night, when I turned off the lights, that same sound came back. And once I swore I heard the faint sound of movement, like fabric shifting under the bed. One night around 2 a.m., I dropped my phone while scrolling in bed. It slid right underneath, out of reach. With a groan, I leaned down and lifted the blanket to grab it. The light from my phone screen flickered across the floor, and that's when I saw them. Eyes, wide, bloodshot eyes staring back at me from the darkness beneath my bed. For a second, my brain didn't even register what I was looking at. My first thought was, maybe it's a doll. But the eyes moved. They blinked. I shot backward, slammed into the wall, and scrambled for the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get it open. I didn't even grab my keys or wallet. I just ran outside barefoot and called 911. When the police arrived, they entered my apartment while I waited outside, crying and shaking on the curb. After what felt like forever, one of the officers came out. His face was pale, his jaw tight. They found a man under my bed. He was filthy, smelled like rot and old sweat. He didn't fight, didn't even talk. Just sat there staring at the floor while they cuffed him. When they searched the rest of the apartment, they found food wrappers, empty water bottles, and a small knife tucked under the mattress. The officer said he'd been living there for at least a week, maybe longer. Later, I learned that the previous tenant, a young woman, had filed multiple reports of a stalker before suddenly moving out. The man they found under my bed was her ex-boyfriend. He had been hiding in that apartment, waiting for her to come back. When I moved in, he must have thought I was her. The police told me he'd been living in the crawl space beneath the floorboards. There was a small hatch behind the closet that led to it. Every night he crawled out to eat, to breathe, to watch. I still remember the last thing the officer said before I left that apartment for good. "You were lucky. You found him before he decided to come out on his own." For months afterward, I couldn't sleep without checking under the bed. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and swear I hear that faint, uneven breathing again, just below me. And every time I do, I make sure to sleep with the lights on. My older sister Rachel became a mom last year. She and her husband Ben moved into a quiet house just outside of town. One of those peaceful neighborhoods with picket fences, old trees, and that eerie calm that feels almost too perfect at night. When the baby was born, a little girl named Emily, Rachel was obsessed with making everything perfect. She got one of those baby monitors that connected through Wi-Fi, the kind that lets you check on your baby through an app, even when you're away. It was supposed to give her peace of mind, but instead, it became the reason she barely sleeps now. It started a few weeks after they brought Emily home. Rachel said she would hear strange sounds through the monitor, faint whispers like a woman's voice but not clear enough to make out. Ben thought maybe it was interference, that the Wi-Fi signal was picking up radio chatter or crossing with another device. But one night, Rachel called me in tears. She said she'd been lying in bed, half asleep, when she heard her own voice come through the monitor. "Shh, Mommy's home now," it whispered. Except Rachel was still in bed. She hadn't even gone near Emily's room. The next day, she brought the monitor over to my place, asked me to test it. Nothing weird happened. It worked perfectly. No voices, no static, just silence. But that night, When she took it back home, the whispers returned. She said sometimes she'd hear faint humming, a lullaby she used to sing to Emily, but she swore she hadn't sung it in weeks. At first, Ben thought she was imagining things, but then it happened while he was home too. Around midnight, the monitor clicked on, and through the speaker came a woman's voice, calm, soft, almost loving. "Go to sleep, baby. Mommy's right here." They both froze. Rachel grabbed her phone and checked the live feed. The screen showed the crib, the soft glow of the nightlight, and a dark figure leaning over Emily. It wasn't Rachel. It wasn't Ben. It was a woman. Her face was blurry, almost pixelated, like the camera couldn't focus. She was just standing there watching the baby, then slowly turned toward the camera and smiled before the screen glitched and went black. They called the police immediately. Officers searched the house from top to bottom but found no signs of a break-in. Every door and window was locked from the inside. For a while, they thought maybe someone hacked the monitor, but the company said it was impossible without the password. And even if someone had hacked it, how did they appear inside the room? The next day, Rachel checked the playback history from the camera. Most of it was gone, automatically erased, but one 15-second clip remained. In that clip, the woman could be seen again, this time standing perfectly still at the crib. Her long hair hung in front of her face, and she was whispering something that sounded like, "She looks just like me." After that, Rachel refused to sleep in the house. They moved in with our parents until they could figure out what to do. When the police finally revisited the house a week later, they discovered something strange in the attic. An old mattress, food wrappers, and a small mirror propped up against a beam. They think someone had been living there. The trapdoor that led to the attic was directly above Emily's room. Rachel never moved back into that house. They sold it months later. To this day, she still refuses to use baby monitors. Sometimes when we talk about it, she says the scariest part wasn't seeing that woman on the screen. It was hearing her voice, because it didn't just sound like her. It was her. Perfectly identical, tone for tone, as if something had been listening long enough to learn how to sound like her. I've always been one of those people who love exploring abandoned things. Old houses, forgotten lots, flea markets, auctions. There's something fascinating about the mystery of what people leave behind. So when I saw an ad for a storage unit auction just outside of town, I couldn't resist. It was one of those events where if someone stops paying their rent, the contents go to the highest bidder. You don't get to look inside, just a quick peek through the doorway before bidding. That day, most of the units were full of the usual junk. Furniture, old clothes, boxes of books. But one caught my attention. A small metal unit, door rusted, with a heavy padlock that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. When the auctioneer lifted the door just a few inches to give us a look, I felt something cold in my stomach. There was a smell, faint but sharp, like mildew and iron. Inside, all I could see were boxes stacked neatly in rows, and an old freezer pushed against the back wall. Nobody else wanted it. I bought it for $90. When I opened it later that afternoon, I was hit by how meticulously everything inside was arranged. The boxes were labeled with numbers, 1 through 48, and inside each one were Polaroid photos, dozens of them. At first glance, they looked like ordinary portraits, the same woman sitting in a chair, facing the camera. But as I flipped through them, I noticed something strange. In each photo, the woman looked a little older, her hair grayer, her eyes duller, her posture weaker. It was like watching someone age in real time, through hundreds of still frames. On the back of one photo, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Don't open the freezer." I should have stopped right there. I knew I should have stopped. But curiosity, that stupid, dangerous curiosity, wouldn't let me. The freezer wasn't plugged in, but it was sealed tight with duct tape. When I started peeling it away, the smell hit me first. That thick, sweet, nauseating stench of rot that you never forget once you've smelled it. I gagged and stumbled back. Inside was a trash bag tied in a knot. I didn't want to touch it, but I noticed something poking through the plastic, something pale, like bone or skin. That's when I realized the Polaroids weren't just someone's weird art project, they were a timeline, a record of a woman's life and her death. I ran out of there and called the police. They came, opened the rest of the freezer, and confirmed what I already feared. Inside were human remains. They said the woman in the photos had been missing for nearly 20 years. She was last seen near that same storage facility, but no one ever found her body. They think whoever took those pictures kept her there, alive for years, documenting her slowly deteriorating. When she finally died, they sealed her body in the freezer and left it behind. The police took everything, but one thing still haunts me. Before they cleared the unit, I saw one last photo stuck to the inside of the freezer lid. It was newer than the rest, the edges clean, the color sharp. It showed the same woman, but her eyes were open and she was looking directly at the camera. On the back of that one, the handwriting was fresh. It read, "You shouldn't have opened it." I never went to another auction after that, but sometimes late at night I dream about that storage unit. I dream about walking inside, seeing that chair, that freezer, that camera still pointed at the door, waiting for whoever comes next. And when I wake up, I swear I can still smell that same faint scent of iron in the air. When I was 15, my friends and I used to hang out in a stretch of forest just outside our small town in Oregon. It wasn't anything special, just a few trails, a creek, and a bunch of half-rotted picnic tables from the 80s. But for us, it was freedom. A place to talk, smoke, and get away from everything. One afternoon in late September, we decided to explore deeper than we'd ever gone before. We packed snacks, flashlights, and a Bluetooth speaker. Typical teenage stuff. The forest was calm that day, except for the faint hum of bugs and the sound of our sneakers crunching through dead leaves. After about an hour of walking, we stumbled on something strange. A narrow dirt path that wasn't part of the main trail. It was hidden behind a cluster of pine trees overgrown with weeds like it hadn't been used in years. Something about it felt wrong. Even the air was quieter there, heavier. But being dumb teenagers looking for something cool, we followed it. After a few minutes, the path opened into a small clearing. And that's when we saw it. A white van. Old, rusted, parked crookedly between the trees like it had been abandoned. At first, we laughed. It looked like something straight out of a horror movie. No plates, mud covering the tires. The windshield was so dusty it was practically opaque. One of my friends, Tyler, joked that we should open it and find the body. We all laughed nervously, but none of us moved. Something about it didn't feel like a joke anymore. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. The van wasn't just old, it was deliberately hidden. Branches had been pulled around it, leaves scattered across the roof, like someone didn't want it to be found. I cupped my hands against the side window to peek inside. That's when my stomach dropped. Inside the van were stacks of paper, missing person flyers, dozens of them, all different faces, men, women, children. But what made my blood run cold was that most of them were from nearby towns. Same area, same time frame. The latest one was dated just 2 weeks earlier, and then I saw it. The last flyer sitting on the driver's seat, it had my face on it. The photo looked like a screenshot from my Instagram. Same hoodie, same background. And underneath my name, it read, "Last seen, September 24th. That was today's date. I stumbled back and dropped the flyer. My friends thought I was messing around until they saw it too. Tyler whispered, "Dude, we need to go, now." We bolted down the path, not even caring which direction we were going. Halfway down the trail, we heard something behind us. A car door slamming, then another. And then the sound of footsteps, heavy ones. We didn't stop running until we reached the main road, breathless and shaking. We flagged down the first car we saw, a park ranger. When we told him what we'd found, he called for backup immediately. They went out to the clearing that same evening. But when they got there, the van was gone. The rangers said there were tire marks, fresh ones, leading out of the woods and onto the service road. No flyers, no evidence, nothing left behind except a single deep groove in the dirt where the tires had been stuck for a moment. They said it was probably an old vehicle someone moved, but that doesn't explain the flyers, or the one with my face on it. It's been nearly 8 years since that day, but I still can't drive through wooded areas without getting that sick, anxious feeling in my gut, because every now and then, late at night, I'll get a message request on Instagram from a private account. No name, no photo, just a white van as the profile picture, and every message says the same thing: "We missed you last time." I used to work the night shift at a small roadside motel just off Highway 62 in Arizona. It wasn't a bad job, quiet most nights, with the occasional traveler or trucker stopping through. The owner, an older man named Frank, trusted me enough to handle the desk alone after 10 p.m. The motel had 16 rooms, all single floor, stretched in a half circle around the parking lot. Room 113 sat near the end, closest to the woods. And for as long as I worked there, it was always marked out of service. I never thought much about it. Most motels have a room like that. Maybe the ceiling leaked or the plumbing was busted. But every once in a while, the phone from room 113 would ring at the front desk, and that was impossible. The first time it happened, I remember looking at the caller ID and freezing. Room 113. I picked up, half expecting static or some kind of glitch. But instead I heard this faint, shaky voice, an older woman. She said, "Excuse me, could you please tell housekeeping to bring me my husband? He's been gone so long." I just sat there, stunned. When I asked which room she was in, she repeated softly, 113, dear. He's probably just at the ice machine again." When I told Frank about it the next morning, he got quiet, like pale and uncomfortable quiet. He told me not to answer calls from that room again. "Line's been dead for years," he said. "Probably interference." But his voice didn't sound like he believed it. A few weeks later, around 2 a.m., it rang again. Same number. Same soft voice. Only this time, she said, "He's back now, but he won't talk to me. He just stands at the door staring." My heart started racing. I told her I'd send someone to check, even though I knew damn well that room hadn't been rented in years. Against my better judgment, I grabbed the master key and walked down the hall. Each step echoed louder than it should have in that empty corridor. The closer I got to 113, the colder the air felt, like stepping into a freezer. When I reached the door, I noticed something strange. There were fresh footprints in the dust on the floor. One set leading in, none coming out. I tried the handle. Locked. I knocked, but there was no answer, just silence. Then from inside I heard a soft sound, like a woman humming. I could feel my chest tighten. I bent down slightly, just enough to peek through the tiny crack at the bottom of the door. That's when I saw movement, a shadow passing slowly across the floor. Someone was in there. I took a step back, ready to call Frank, when the phone at the front desk started ringing again. I could hear it echoing down the hall. And this time, I realized something horrifying. If the phone was ringing up front, who had called me from room 113? I ran back to the desk. The caller ID flashed room 113, but the line cut the second I picked up. I called Frank in a panic. He drove over 20 minutes later, half asleep, flashlight in hand. When we opened room 113 together, the smell hit us first, that thick, sour scent of mildew and something else underneath, like rot. Inside, the room looked decades old, untouched. The wallpaper was peeling, furniture covered in dust. But on the bed, there were 2 clear indentations, side by side, like someone had just been sitting there. On the nightstand sat a rotary phone, its cord cut clean through. And in the center of the bed was an old photograph, 2 people, a smiling couple in front of that very room. On the back, written in faded ink, "Our honeymoon, 1979, room 113. Frank told me later that the couple in that photo had been guests there 40 years ago. The husband apparently vanished one night after going to get ice. They never found him. His wife stayed in that room for days, refusing to leave. Until one morning, the maid found her, sitting on the edge of the bed, eyes open, stone cold. I quit a few months after that. But sometimes I still think about that voice. Soft, lonely, asking for her husband like he might walk through the door at any moment. And every once in a while, when I drive past that old motel, I see the light from room 113 flicker on, even though it's been boarded up for decades. And I swear, I can still hear that faint humming in the air. I used to work as a night security guard at a small private hospital just outside Portland. It wasn't one of those busy, big city hospitals, more of a quiet facility, mostly elderly patients and long-term care cases. The kind of place where the air always smells like antiseptic and sadness. My job was simple: patrol the halls, check the emergency exits, and make sure no one unauthorized came in after visiting hours. The front desk had a thick, worn-out visitor logbook. Everyone who came in after hours had to sign their name, the patient they were visiting, and the time they left. I used to joke that it looked older than the building itself. The edges yellowed, pages smudged with ink and fingerprints. It sounds boring, I know, and it was. Until the night someone started signing that log, who wasn't really there. It was a rainy Tuesday night, one of those nights where you can hear the building creak and shift. I was at the desk, sipping burnt coffee, scrolling my phone when I noticed movement at the glass door. A man stood there in a long gray coat, completely drenched. He looked exhausted, like he'd been walking for hours. I buzzed him in and asked who he was visiting. He said, "Room 209, Margaret Ellis. I'm her son." Something about his tone felt hollow. But he signed the logbook like everyone else. David Ellis, 11:47 p.m., and quietly walked down the hall toward room 209. The thing is, room 209 was one of the palliative care rooms. Mrs. Ellis had passed away 3 days earlier. I was the one who'd helped the nurse wheel her body out. At first, I thought maybe I'd misheard him. I checked the system just to be sure. No one named David Ellis was listed as a visitor or emergency contact. When I went to check the hallway camera feed, my stomach dropped. The motion detector had triggered at 11:47 p.m., but the camera feed showed nothing. The door opened, the motion light flicked on, but there was no one there. Still, the logbook had his name, written in fresh black ink. The next night I came in for my shift, trying to brush it off. But when I opened the logbook, there it was again. David Ellis, 11:47 p.m. The same time, the same name. I checked the footage again, same glitch. The door opens, the lights flicker, but no one comes in. That's when I started getting uneasy. So the following night, I kept the pen hidden in my pocket and locked the front doors early. No one could sign in. At exactly 11:47 p.m., the front lights flickered, the door rattled once, and when I looked down at the logbook, there it was again. David Ellis, 11:47 p.m., written in fresh ink. The pen was still in my pocket. At this point, I couldn't ignore it. I went down the hall toward room 209, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The hallway was freezing, colder than anywhere else in the building. When I reached the room, the door was slightly open. The bed was empty, the sheets neatly folded, but on the nightstand sat a family photo. A woman and a teenage boy standing in front of a lake. The boy's name on the back of the photo was written in fading blue ink. David Ellis, 1989. I looked up at the wall, and there it was. A framed chart listing patients who had passed in that room. Margaret Ellis, deceased October 12th. Below her name, written in pencil, David Ellis. Admitted October 11th, deceased October 11th, 1989. He died more than 30 years earlier. I didn't even realize I'd dropped the flashlight until I heard it rolling on the floor. My breathing grew shallow. I swear I felt someone standing right behind me. Then, from the bed, came a faint creaking sound, like someone shifting their weight on the mattress. When I turned around, I saw the sheets slowly pressing down, as if invisible hands were smoothing them out. And then, softly, almost like a whisper, I heard a man's voice say, "She's not alone anymore." I bolted out of there, called my supervisor, and refused to finish the shift. The next morning, I went back to grab my stuff. The logbook was still on the desk, opened to a fresh page. Under the last entry, written neatly in blue ink, it said, David Ellis, signed out, 3:15 a.m. That was the last night I worked there. But every time I pass that hospital, I can still see the faint glow from room 209's window, even though that wing's been closed for years. And I can't help but wonder if somewhere, on that old logbook, another name is waiting to appear next. I grew up in a small town in northern Illinois, the kind of place where nothing exciting ever happens. We lived in an old farmhouse my parents bought cheap after the previous owner passed away. It was quiet, lonely, surrounded by acres of cornfields. The nights there were dark, too dark. When I was 12, my dad got me a small TV for my room, one of those old, boxy sets with a dial instead of buttons. It barely picked up 3 channels, but to me, it felt like freedom. Every night before bed, I'd flip through the channels until the static came on, that fuzzy black and white snow with the faint hiss behind it. I don't know why, but the sound helped me fall asleep. It felt like background noise for a house that was otherwise dead quiet. Until the night the static started whispering. I remember it clearly. It was late, maybe past midnight. I woke up because I heard my name. It was faint, but I swear I heard it through the static. Eli. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard it again. Softer this time, drawn out like someone was speaking through a bad connection. Eli, turn it back. I froze. The TV had been off when I fell asleep. Now it was on, the static flickering in the dark, casting light across the room. My heart pounded as I reached for the remote and turned it off. But even when the screen went black, the faint hissing continued, like it was coming from inside the TV. The next morning I told my dad. He laughed it off, said the old TV probably picked up radio signals by accident. That made sense, I guess. The thing was ancient. But over the next week, it happened again. Always at the same time, 12:37 a.m., the voice would whisper my name, sometimes followed by broken sentences like someone trying to speak through water. Eli, help us, or don't look outside. That last one chilled me to the bone, because every time the voice said that, I'd hear soft scratching sounds coming from my window, like nails dragging slowly across the glass. One night, I decided to record it. I stayed up pretending to sleep with my dad's old cassette recorder running beside me. At 12:37, the static returned. The voice came through clearer than ever. It wasn't whispering my name this time. It was sobbing. He's here. Eli, don't turn it off. I sat up, shaking, staring at the TV. The static started to pulse. Slow, rhythmic flashes of light, almost like breathing. Then, just for a second, I saw something in the snow. A face. It appeared in the fuzz, eyes wide open, mouth slack, like someone screaming behind glass. And right before the screen cut to black, I heard one final word, so clear it didn't sound like static anymore. Run! The lights in the house flickered. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, moving down the hallway toward my room. I screamed for my dad. He came running, burst in, and flipped the lights on. No one was there, but the TV was still on, even though it had no power cord plugged in. He ripped it off the shelf, carried it outside, and threw it into the barn. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did he. The next morning, he went out to check the barn. The TV was gone. All that was left was the cord lying in the dust, cleanly cut in half. A few days later, we moved out. He never explained why, but I overheard him on the phone with the real estate agent saying something about undisclosed history. Years later, when I was in college, I looked it up myself. The previous owner, a man named Robert Lansing, had been found dead in that same room. Police reports said he'd been sitting in front of his TV, burned into the screen by static discharge from a freak electrical fault. Time of death, 12:37 a.m. Last month, out of nostalgia, I bought an old TV from a thrift shop. It looked almost identical. Just for fun, I hooked it up in my apartment, and at midnight, I turned it to a dead channel. Nothing. Just static. I laughed, feeling stupid for even trying. But then, right as I reached for the dial to turn it off, I heard it again. Faint, buried beneath the noise. Eli, we found you again.